Hi there. Don't know which MacBook to choose. How much more powerful is the M4 Pro than the M3 Pro and the M2 Pro, and is it even necessary to take a Pro when the usual M4 is so powerful? Is the M2 Ultra more powerful than the M4 Max? And M4 about what M1 Max? Today, I will answer all these questions. Moreover, today, we will compare all the processors of the Apple M in many tasks. Graphics, processor, neural engine, and not only that. Among other things, I will tell you about the new MacBooks. New MacBook. At first glance, there are not so many changes, but there are enough of them. Let's say a new type of screens is quantum dots. Hardly many people knew about it. Or here is a complete box. They didn't change the screensaver, but you know that it was drawn by a guy from St. Petersburg. But about this in the end. And we'll start with the other most interesting thing, the difference between processors. I had already made a clear plate that year, but this year we finalized it, adjusted the results to the most accurate. And we had to make several different plates. This tells about the difference in the processor part. The top is the most powerful chip, the bottom is the weakest. As usual, we take M1 for 100% as a starting point, and look at how much more powerful the other chips are. M4 Max tears everyone to shreds. He is 3 times more powerful than M1. It is even more powerful than the M2 Ultra, but at the same time, the M1 Ultra and M2 Pro lose to the usual M4. I say again, this is a CPU without graphics. But I'm telling you, we have finalized the table. And all processors of the M series are available in 2 versions, with different numbers of cores and processor and graphics. And if we add them to our results, because initially we based them on the maximum versions, then the results change a lot. Let's say the top simple M4 is stronger than the minimum M3 Pro. Therefore, my friends, when you choose a MacBook, you look not only at the name of the processor, but also at the number of cores. This is very important. Yes, by the way, for clarity, I also added a MacBook Pro 16, 2019 in the maximum configuration. On Core i9-9980K with Radeon Pro 5600M, 8 gigs Gear 5, just for comparison. So that it was clear how far behind the most powerful MacBook on Intel in history. It lags behind the processor of the M1 2000 of the 20th year, although the COM itself is 2000 of the 19th. And, in principle, the processor is one of the top solutions among the x86 laptops. In my opinion, super visually. Owners of Macs on Intel, well, it's already true. It's time to think. What can we understand from this tablet? If your tasks are tied exclusively to the processor, then first of all, it makes little sense to upgrade say M3 Max. To M4 Max, there is a difference, but not to say that it is incredible. At the same time, there will also be no difference in the choice between M4 Pro and M3 Max. It will only be in the price, but it will also be much more efficient to keep the M4 Pro battery. What examples? Let's say work in Xcode. The results of compiling time here will be very similar to the results in the table. Let's say you have M1 Pro according to our plate, 118%, M4 Pro 230%. Both are minimal versions. It turns out that M4 Pro will be almost twice as fast to assemble a project as M1 Pro. In general, put it on pause, consider it, and we go on. Graphics. Here the results are even more interesting. First of all, there are much more configurations in terms of the number of cores already available. The minimum M448 cores, which is currently installed in the iMac, is inferior in terms of graphics to the top M2 and M3. And Radeon 5600 by 8 GB is the card that is in the most powerful MacBook Pro of the 19th year, and the top solution of the same year, located between the top M3 and M4 in power. At the same time, imagine its consumption even without an ambulance is several times higher than that of M chips. Suddenly, the top M4 is close to the minimum M1 Pro, but seriously lags behind the maximum M1 Pro 16 nuclear. But the M4 Pro in both versions is well ahead of all previous Pro models. But the funny thing is that M3 Pro does not bypass M2 Pro because of the smaller number of cores. And both of these chips compete with the minimum M1 Max in terms of graphics. And finally, it becomes clear that both versions of the M2 Ultra and the minimum and maximum are leaders in terms of graphics so far. The M4 Max is very close, but it is not catching up yet. Nevertheless, how the Pro and Max versions have been upgraded in recent years, there are no words at all. And especially according to the schedule. And here again, if your profile software is tied exclusively to the chart, look carefully at the sign. And think about which next Mac should be taken, and whether it should be taken at all. You have M1 Max, well, then M4 Max will be at least twice as powerful, or even 2.5. Depends on the configuration of the graphics cores. You have M2 Pro for 16 graphics cores, so M4 Pro minimum for the same 16 cores will be only 35% more powerful. And it doesn't seem to make sense to update, although, well, the increase is normal, but a 20 nuclear M4 Pro will already be 50% more powerful than a 16 nuclear M2 Pro, and then the meaning suddenly appears. It is important to note that the results are based on graphics tests without using ray tracing, because M1 and M2 stupidly do not support it. But with ray tracing, the gap between M1M2 and M3M4 would be even greater. But we'll talk about this a little later in this video. And finally, the third test is the NPU, the neuroprocessor, the same 16-core new engine. It is important to take into account here that all engines in each processor line are the same for each modification. Therefore, the difference in the neural engine tests between, let's say, M2, M2 Pro, Max, and even M2 Ultra will not be at all. This means that we consider the entire M1 line to be 100%. The M2 turns out to be exactly twice as fast, according to the NPU. The M3 series practically does not differ from the M2. But the M4 is much ahead. It is more than 3 times more powerful than the M1. And again, if your activity is already tied to neurocomputing, then your choice is any processor from the M4 series, and not even necessarily Pro. The usual M4 is enough. Well, is it clear it turned out? I know, I see. And for those who do not want to go deeper, in principle, it is already possible to navigate safely by these signs. But Macs are not only the graphics processor of the NPU, they are also media, engines, cooling, and much more. Therefore, we will look further at specific examples. But first about the processors themselves. M4 Pro 1214 processor cores, and both options are already available in ready-made non-custom configurations. There can be 16 or 20 graphics cores. There are always 16 neural engine cores. The combined memory is 24 or 48 gigabytes. 24 in the database, by the way, wow. It used to be 18. The built-in memory in the database is 512 gigs, but it can be expanded to 4 terabytes, and the bandwidth is 273 gigabytes per second. 3 Pro had only 150 gigabytes, despite the fact that M1 and M2 Pro had under 200 gigabytes. And the M has 4 productive cores, about 10, OM to about 8, and 3 about 6 for top configurations. There is a feeling that it was the M3 Pro that turned out to be extremely unsuccessful, including due to the configuration of the cores. A strange combination. M4 Max now. There are 14 processor cores in the database, but there may be 16, graphics 32 or 40 gigabytes per second. Depending on the configuration, M3, M2, M1 Max had exactly 400 and 300 gigabytes.
Пропускная способность 410 или 546 гигабайт в секунду в зависимости от конфигурации. У M3, M2 и M1 Max было ровно 400 и 300 гигабайт.
That is, for the first time, the bandwidth of the Max processor was increased and thrown right solidly. Let's take a look at the integration. Here, by the way, the necessary useful. We are so used to services and technologies that we perceive it as something ordinary. But how, for example, can a person with a speech disorder communicate with voice assistants or a weakly seeing person watch TV series? Have you ever wondered? And Yandex is thinking. The company has a special inclusion team that develops feature products specifically for people with health problems, so that they fully get access to modern technologies. It's a wonderful thing. From recent examples, Yandex has trained Alice to better understand speech with disabilities, for example, in people with cerebral palsy, or with the consequences of stroke and other injuries. The company also already has 16 services adapted for users with visual impairments, for example, a smart home with Alice, a calendar, a CAPTCHA, and others. All of these services are available for screen access programs that read out the visual elements of the interfaces by voice. And this allows blind people to interact freely with them. Also, blind and visually impaired people are helped by Tyflo commentaries in Kinopoisk, a virtual storyteller in Yandex Books, and a smart camera application that helps blind people read text and recognize objects and photos using a smartphone. More Yandex products. Inclusions simplify communication between people. There is a separate Yandex application for this. A conversation with text-to-speech translation, and vice versa, so that users with hearing and speech impairments can communicate with hearing people without assistance. But that's cool. Technologies make life easier, and with inclusive features from Yandex, technologies are available to everyone. I shake hands with everyone involved, and in the description, I will leave a link to the site for review. Now, media engines are an important component for those who are engaged in video rendering. Many editing programs use not only graphics and processor for rendering, but also media engines, and in fact, these are separate mini processors on the board. In general, for many a useful thing. And remember that there are 4 Pro in M. First of all, hardware support for HVC, slot row ASH264. Secondly, there is an Encode video engine, a Deco video engine one at a time. One Encode Deco engine for the slot, and one Deco engine for the AB1. And the same thing in M321 Pro. If we are talking about the M4 Max, everything looks like it again, but there are already 2 Encode video engines, and 2 Encode Deco engines for the slot. The rest is the same. And in previous M-Max processors, exactly the same number of engines. And of course, I would like to have more. And that's where we turn to the tests. Let's start with just the application that partially uses all these encodes when rendering the DaVinci Code engines across the hall. Our project consists of ASH264 Sony files, graphics slots, and raw editing. Yes, in case you haven't noticed, we switched to camera ed. Well, let's see. 6 minutes and 50 seconds M4 Max, almost 9 minutes M3 Max. M2 Max is very close to M3, but M1 Max is already 2 times behind M4 Max. The Pro versions are 10.5 minutes M4 Pro and 15 to 16 minutes M321. Here, as I said, a lot depends on media engines, graphics, and the processor, about some file cut, and even engine. And we also use the maximum versions of processors in our tests. Therefore, from the point of view of taking the car for installation, I would recommend looking at the M234 Max, or at the M4 Pro for 14 plus 20 cores, that is, the maximum. Of course, the M4 Max shows phenomenal results, and the M4 Pro works almost as fun as the M3 Max. But it's worse nonetheless. And at the same time, conditionally M2 Max, I would not change to M4 Pro, as if the difference is not so great. And one more important clarification. MacBooks on the M4 Pro M4 Max give out peak performance without dropping frequencies up to 1% of the charge. If we take M3, M2, M1, Max, and Pro, then they are already at 10% of the charge, starting to wildly reset frequencies and slow down. There is no such thing here, but believe me, it sometimes saves. We're moving on. Author effect. Yes, we do not include the usual M1, 2, 3, 4 in the test, because these are niche processors. We have a separate video about them, but here is a professional solution for professionals. No one will take a MacBook Air on M3, they're to work in the author effect. Here, by the way, the combined memory and graphics are already important. So, here we do not have everything so unambiguous. M4 Max 5 minutes 20 seconds, M3 Max 6 minutes, M2 Max 8 minutes, M1 12. M Pro from 9.5 to 13 minutes. And here the strangeness is that if the usual M4 in the tests, the author's effect was greatly pumped even relative to M3, then the Pro and Max versions do not seem to be so significant. Therefore, if you update even SAM to Max, then take unambiguously the Max version, that is M4 Max. Well, and order as much operativa as possible at once. And again, it makes little sense for the author effect to update SAM3 Max to M4 Max. An important clarification. If you go to compare the results with previous videos about M3 Max, about M2 Max, then you need to understand that applications can be updated over time, get additional optimization for new processors. So on M4 Pro and M4 Max, the results in the same author effect may be better over time. About 3 days at once. Red Shift benchmark. This is where the presence of support for the write rating in the M3-M4 series comes into the race, so the results are as follows. M4 Max took 2 minutes and 40 seconds to render, M3 Max 3 minutes and 20 seconds, M2 Max 6 minutes and 40 seconds, and M1 more than 11 minutes. Excellent performance at M4 Pro and M3 Pro. Want to spin 3Ds with tracing. But these are M4 Max, M3 Max, and M4 Pro. That's how I think. Here we also add the tests of the Blue Bench 2024, which also uses tracing. M3, M4 Max Pro give out much more points. At the same time, if we look at the results of the Geekbench in metal, then the separation of the old silicone apps will not be huge. It will be decent, but not too Let's move on to the processor tests. Xcode, max 49 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 2.5. ProShti 58, minute 20, and then on the rolled. In general, any Mac on M3 or M4 Pro and Max is your choice. Logic Pro, the maximum number of tracks that can be turned on at the same time. Here there is almost no difference between M3, M2, M1, but how much M4, M3, and M4 Pro give out? 370, 304, and 303 tracks. It can be seen that in this discipline M4 Pro and M3 Max are the same, and the choice is obvious. 3 of these processors are set to music. This time, I'm not going to say how fast the ST files open. Well, everywhere is very fast. Or how much time to spend the Lightroom rendering photos. Again, the M3 and M4 series will be twice as fast as the M2 and 1 series. But nevertheless, we have also done a number of other tests. These are Geekbench singles, multi, speedometer, blender, Bluebench test on the processor part. All this beats with the tables that I initially showed at the beginning. But in any case, if you are interested in comparing, put it on pause. So, well, we're done with the tests. I will only add that if you want maximum performance and less trolling, it is better to take, of course, the 16-inch version. I admit, there is a problem at 14 inches, it overheats faster, it starts dropping frequencies faster. In this case, this little thing helps me. It is sold on any AliExpress for 500-1,000 rubles and performs the function 100%. Well, that is, the MacBook just stops trotting. I used to yaw at 16 inches because it also starts to overheat over time. But the maximum CPU and graphics load is how much? 5 to 10% of the working time. The rest of the time you are mounting, assembling a move or something else. Therefore, 14 inches is also quite an option. Second, the Pro versions of processors at medium and high loads consume much less battery than the Max versions of processors. Therefore, if you choose between the Pro and Max versions, then first of all, you can sacrifice performance due to greater autonomy. Or if the choice is worth M4 Pro or M3 Max at all, they are quite similar in performance. But at the same time, the computer will keep the M4 Pro for 1.5 to 2 times longer. And here the choice is obvious, and it can also be cheaper. And one last thing, if you are a professional on M1 Max, then it's time to take M4 Max. I promise you will feel the difference. About SD quickly. If the Mac is 512 gigabytes, the speed will be around 3,000 for reading and writing. If 1 terabyte is 5,500 and 6,000 megabytes per second. From 2 and above again 5,506 for reading and 8,500 megabytes for writing. This applies to models on the M3 and M4. M2 and M1 will be a little slower, but not so much as to get upset right away. Well, that's it. Yes, not all of them. We are still looking at the MacBook. In my case, this is a 14-inch model without a matte screen, a BIOS layout. 8 gigabytes of memory, 128 RAM, M4 Max and the same, but on M4 Pro. Silver is here too. Unpacking. There is nothing interesting in the kit. You always get a 70-watt power supply if you have a 14-inch model on the M4 or M4 Pro 12-core. If you have a 14-core M4 Pro, there will be 96 watts, like this one. It also goes for the 14-core MacBook Pro M4 Max. Well, 16-inch Macs get a power supply of 140 watts. Well, and Max CF3 cables in the color of the case, either black or white. It seems to me that with the M2 version, Max stopped using the MagSafe cable, bought this thick Type-C from Apple Original. Firstly, for some reason, I always have sockets on the right, and secondly, it is more convenient to charge the phone. But I didn't want to start unpacking with this, but with the fact that the Apple didn't update the wallpaper on the box. The news itself does not make sense for discussion. What is interesting here is that this picture was drawn by a native of St. Petersburg named Vlad Solovyev, who now lives in England. And the funny thing is, judging by his personal public, he draws on ZenBook Pro 2. And that would be so clickable that the main picture for the MacBook is drawn on the Ace. But no, he drew it on a MacBook. There are no changes in design and the same colors. According to the classics, I recommend taking silver, because space black gets dirty and gets overwritten. SAM2 versions have not changed, and the standards are Wi-Fi 6E. No, it's Bluetooth 5 and 3. The ports are about the same, a slow slot for SD cards, PMI, to with support for 8 to 60 FPS, or 4 to 240. The same standard as M2 and M3. Let me remind you that in the versions M1 Max, M1 Pro there was PMI 2.0. And which one is in the new one? 2.1, 2.1a, 2.1b. One day I'll tell you about the difference in the PMI versions. Believe me, it's not as boring as with US. Well, you remember, yes, US 3.0, 3.1, 3 to Gene 1, Gene 2, 2x2. Haven't you watched the videos yet? Absolutely. Here too, US 4, but this is US 4.2.0 with a speed of up to 80 gigabits per second. And at the same time, it is also a Thunderbolt 5 ports. And from Thunderbolt 5, I have already described in detail in the video about the new Mac Men. I will leave a link to it in the description. Now let me remind you once again that the most important thing is that the speed of external SDs will increase. If it used to be 40 gigabits per second, now it's 80 gigabits per second. And translating this into a normal value, if earlier the maximum speed in the best case with the best SD was 3,500 megabytes per second for reading records, now it will be 7,000. However, you need to buy a Thunderbolt 5 cable and a new case that supports it. According to the monitors, the Max version pulls up to 4 monitors. But everything is very subtle there. The Apple has a separate article on how many monitors can be connected to the MacBook Pro, in what resolutions, and with what packaging, on what processor versions, and what year. I will leave a link to the article from the Apple in the description, otherwise I will have to spend 15 minutes just to explain which ones where. And the charging speed via Tipsy has increased from 100 watts to 240 watts. Again, you buy the original Apple cable and are glad that it's good. Well, here you have a 16-inch MacBook that eats 140 watts. You connect it to an external monitor. And you still need to cut the MagSafe so that it does not discharge during operation. I've had this happen a lot. So please, now the monitors will also be updated according to Tipsy, I think, and that's good. Well, the 14-inch one 896 watts, and it eats. Nothing has changed here, it was convenient here anyway. Then the screen has changed. Unfortunately, it is still a Neo-LED, it is still a Mini-LED, but now using quantum dots instead of a phosphorus film, which is supposedly considered harmful. What does this mean for you? Well, look, first of all, the brightness has increased. Now, in the dire mode, a whole 1,000 nits from the monitor shines on you. Although before there were 600 nits in the CM version 3 Max Pro, and on the M2 M1 Max Pro, there were generally 500 nits. However, this has nothing to do with quantum dots. And then there are applications such as Vivi, Luna, Total XDR, which on old MacBook Pro increased the brightness to 1,600 nits. Well, just the Apple sets the threshold, and then you can raise it. So well, the battery will eat fiercely, but you can. But here's what I noticed for sure, and maybe it's related to quantum dots. Previously, when you mount, watch a video, generally work, and go from a very light scene to a very dark scene. From a white screen to a black one, there is such a micro-look for a fraction of a second when the black screen is highlighted, and once. Then it cuts off. Right now, there is no such problem in the new MacBooks on the M4 Pro Max. Then, for 150 Bachinskis, you can apply a NAND coating on the glass, that is, make it matte. Just like on a Pro display with Dire, AMAGs, iPads, and an Apple display. What's it called there? Well, you understand. And I basically did not take a matte screen. Why? Yes, because well, fuck him. Let it be glossy, but matte, it eats up the contrast very much. Here, the stemmed rings have a matte screen. And why do you need it? By the way, pay attention to the new white stemmed rings. That's the power, of course. In short, I recommend taking this nanocoating only to those whose activities are not tied to the editing of colors with painting. If you even mount it there, stick it in, do something in the author of the effect. But if someone paints it after you, then there are no questions, you can take it. Although I don't see the point. And also, if you are used to gluing a film on a Mac 4 protection, I understand you perfectly. There seems to be no point in gluing on a nanotexture at all, but for the sake of experiment, I ordered this kind of film. This is a matte film from AliExpress, which costs $5, not $150, and it doesn't reflect anything. I'll take it off after the video. As for the front camera, it has also been updated. Now it's 12 megapixels with support for the focus function. That is, if I move around the frame, it moves behind me. But since I record on QuickTime, nothing moves, but it works in FaceTime. There is also a desktop function, which, because of the wide angle, can show what is on the desktop. In principle, it's also cool. You can also evaluate the sound, and for calls, it's probably a buzz. Battery 72 and 4 watt-hours for MacBook Pro 14, 100 watt-hours for MacBook Pro 16, nothing has changed. But oddly enough, the battery life has increased, especially the M4 Pro. For example, he has 22 hours of video playback, when M3 Pro has only 18. Web surfing has also grown by a couple of hours, now 14M for Pro, 13 hours for Max, instead of 12 M3, M2, and 11 VM1 Pro and Max. But I've been using the M4 Max version for 3 weeks now, and I don't see any difference Sam 3 Max at all. But again, the screen here has become brighter, and plus, it does not lose performance up to 1%, as I have already said. Well, in principle, not bad. But I say again, if you want both productivity and autonomy, take M for about Anima. What else is left to note? Support for spatial audio with hat tracking for AirPods 4 and Pro 2. That is, the old models do not support, the new ones support the M4. Nonsense. Well, the function, in principle, is also nonsense. I think someone is using it. The prices are $2,000, 2,400 euros, this is firm 4M4 Pro, and $3,200. 3,800 euros for the version on M4 Max. And it's 14 inches, 16 is even more expensive. Conclusions. First of all, as before, you can safely buy a 14-inch version, which personally covers all my tasks, but if you need an even more powerful computer that will trot less, then yes, 16 inches. But I have enough of this. Secondly, M4 Pro, M4 Max can be safely taken by those who sit on M1 Pro and M1 Max. Well, the owners of computers on Intel already have doctors officially prescribe recommendations that it's time to upgrade. The sensations will be unforgettable. Thirdly, if you have always dreamed of a MacBook Pro on an M processor with the maximum amount of SD, then now is the time to look at the Bushnell options, because they all lose a lot in price. M3 Max, M2 Max, M1 Max 4.8 or 4 terabytes is now much cheaper. Well, let's say if M3 Max cost 800,000 rubles there that year, that is, now they sell them there for 500. Maybe 550,000. M2 and M1 Max by 8 terabytes will be even cheaper. 1,400, maybe even less. Therefore, if storage is the most important thing for you, then it seems to me that an option on the other hand. If you now buy M4 Max 4.8 terabytes, you know that in a year it will become much cheaper. The most popular Macs are 1 or 2 terabytes, so they don't lose so much in price. And I also boast of finding this for people who do not like to use covers on poppies, because they increase the weight. And then the hinge gets loose because of this, and in general it is inconvenient. There is such a wonderful thing. This is a cover printed on a 3D printer. Weight does not add, and over the years of use, I noticed that these places suffer most often. That's where everything becomes stripped. That's the kind of crap that saves. I found this on a European website. If anything, not advertising, just here's a cool thing. And finally, there are plenty of updates in the new Mac. And the camera is new, the screens are also new, the autonomy seems to have grown. Although this most likely applies to the M4 Pro version. Productivity has grown strongly. So now you know which Macs to upgrade to, and whether to do it. Well, at least I hope so. Such a story.